everybody. Today, I am thrilled to welcome Nancy Guthrie to The Rising. Nancy teaches Bible at her home church in Franklin, Tennessee, as well as at conferences around the U.S. and the world. She is the author of numerous books and the host of the Help Me Teach the Bible podcast with the Gospel Coalition. She and her husband founded respite retreats for couples who have faced the death of a child, and they are co-hosts of the Grief Share video series. Nancy has a new book out titled Saved that provides a guide to the book of Acts. Over 17 chapters, she invites readers to peer into the lives of the apostles in the days following the resurrection and ascension of Jesus as they experienced new power from the Holy Spirit. Nancy is also an amazing encourager, listener, friend, and walking partner. Please welcome my friend, Nancy Guthrie. Nancy, thank you for being here. This podcast so far has been very scholarly, very academic about the resurrection, the context around that, the historical event. And you, I know, can talk about that, but you also have talked spiritually about the resurrection because you've endured major loss. And so for anyone who doesn't know your story, I would just be honored if you'd share a little bit about your losses and let's start there and how the resurrection, the fact that there is resurrection has come to mean so much.
Yeah. Well, my husband, David, and I, we have a son who's 35. And when he was 8 years old, I gave birth to a daughter named Hope. I gave her that name because I just liked it. But the reality of Hope's life was that in many ways it seemed hopeless. Hope was born with a rare metabolic disorder called Zellweger syndrome, something I had never heard of. And it's a rare metabolic disorder that meant when she was born, they said there's already been a lot of damage to all of her major organs, especially her liver and her kidneys and her brain. And they told us that most children with that syndrome live less than 6 months. So that's what we found out on her second day of life. And, you know, Mel, I had really been looking forward to taking home a daughter who would grow old with me and be my friend in my old age. And so it was devastating to find out on her second day of life that actually, we were going to take her home, but we were going to take her home to die and to usher her very quickly toward death. And Hope was with us for 199 days. It's hard to describe those days because they were such a mixture of real sadness and also profound joy. I know that might sound crazy to people, but there is something about life when you know it's going to be short that's very precious. Mm. And so those days in many ways were very rich. We had lots of people who drew in close to us that had maybe just been on the fringes of our lives, and that was precious to us. Because there's just so much about facing death and the difference that the gospel makes when we face death that we simply don't reckon with until we get there. And we got there. The night came when David checked on her in the middle of the night and she was cold to the touch. And, I had kind of thought to myself, honestly, Mel, I kind of thought, I've had all of these months to prepare for this. So, grief's not going to be that hard for me. Not as hard for me as it might be for other people who haven't had that time to prepare for it. And you know what? Grief just does not work that way. Mm-hmm. There is a big difference between knowing someone's going to die and that they're gone.
They're gone. Yeah. It's so final. Feels so final.
And nowhere, you can't see their skin and touch their skin anymore. Yeah. And just gone. So the thing about having a child with this syndrome means that both my husband, David, and I must be carriers of the recessive gene trait for that syndrome. So I'm sure you remember from your high school biology class what it means to have a recessive gene trait. This is what you have to have, like to have a child with blue eyes. And so both parents have to carry that recessive gene trait. And then whenever they have a child, that child would have a 25% chance of having blue eyes. So it was the same for me and David. Our son had hit those healthy 75% odds. But now we knew that whenever we have a child, that child would have that 25% chance of having this fatal syndrome. And so it meant that we had a difficult decision to make about whether or not we would have more children. And so we determined to take surgical steps to prevent another pregnancy. So you can imagine my surprise to discover a year and a half after Hope died that I was pregnant. But I wasn't just surprised. I was afraid.
Yeah.
That year and a half after Hope died, it's hard to put into words just the deep, heavy sadness that I felt. And at that point, I was just beginning to feel like it was lifting. Like I didn't cry in my car alone every time I got in and drove somewhere. From my house.
You feel a little bit human again.
Just like, it's like the sun was starting to come out again.
Yeah.
And I can just remember feeling like, okay, the gray clouds are moving in again. And there was also a sense of, wow, Lord, is it possible that you would ask me to do that again? So we went through prenatal testing. I had to wait a while for that. And then we had to wait a while for the results. And then the geneticist called and said, you're going to have a son this time, and he's going to have the same fatal syndrome. So it was kind of the same but different, to be honest with you. It was different. It was different going through the pregnancy that time for all those months, knowing I was going to have a child who would die. It was awkward a lot. People would walk up to me who knew Hope had died, and they'd be so excited to see that I was pregnant. And, oh, this is wonderful. And, they'd say things like, oh, this is God blessing you for your faithfulness during all of that. And I'm just standing there trying to decide, okay, am I going to tell him this child's going to die too? So our son, Gabriel, was born in July of 2001, and he was beautiful and so easy to love. He was affected in many of the same ways his sister had been, in terms of being very lethargic and not being able to interact because of a lot of brain damage, and developing seizures at 3 months, and then having to be medicated heavily for those. And he was with us a similar amount of time, 183 days. And then we said goodbye to him.
I read your book, Holding On to Hope, which is, for anyone who doesn't know about it, you said it came out in 2002.
Yeah.
So it's been out a while. It's a beautiful story for anyone, especially anyone enduring loss. So if you're out there listening to this and you have a loss you're processing, I totally advise getting it and feeling the fellowship of that book. But I love that you said about how even a believer who believes in the resurrection, while enduring a loss, it doesn't necessarily feel like present comfort. It feels far off.
It can seem so religious and, so future-oriented. Like, how can this bring me comfort in the present, what I'm feeling now?
So how do you process that? Like, how can believers in their times of grief latch onto the reality of the resurrection in a way that does feel present?
Well, the first thing I would say is, I think the very process of going through grief and finding some healing and wholeness in it is the process of constantly questioning your thoughts and feelings and saying, is that true? Figuring out what's true, and then marinating in that to the degree that you begin to feel that it's true. Okay. In the midst of grief, we got voices around us, but it's mostly the voices inside us. Like, you'll never be happy again.
Yeah.
Or you'll always be alone. And these voices rise up, and you just, you have to, like I said, you kind of, oh, so that's what I'm thinking. And you kind of go, is that true? And no, that's not true. And here's what is true. And so I'm going to focus on that and marinate in that until it begins to feel true. And those voices don't have so much strength to take me down anymore. With resurrection, I remember waking up on Easter morning when we had Hope with us. So Hope would have been about 4 months at that time. And I knew they were doing a sunrise service at our church. And I didn't shower. I mean, like I threw on a hat and, I'm sure I looked really terrible, but I had to get there. I had to get there. Because suddenly, whether or not the resurrection was real and true, made all the difference. Right. And I remember getting there and looking around, and it was people who had lost people that were there that early, that were willing to get up, because it's like, this matters. This matters. When you love someone and you know that they're going to die, whether or not the resurrection is really true, do I have any real reason to anticipate that I will be reunited with this person that I love so much? And so I remember that Easter meant so much to me. I also remember then one thing that had been really hard for me with Hope was that she had died during the night and I wasn't aware that she was dying. And just as a mom, that brought me a lot of pain.
How did you work through that?
So that was always really painful for me. So when I got pregnant with Gabe and we had Gabe, one thing I said to the Lord, would you give me this gift? You don't have to, but if you just give me this gift of knowing when he's dying so we can be there with him. Mm. And he gave me that gift, for which I'm really grateful. Mm. And I remember, Melanie, that night, I mean, we put him in the middle of the bed between us, me and David, and we thanked God for his life. And I had a copy of Eugene Peterson's The Message sitting on my nightstand. And I just said, Gabe, do you want to hear about the resurrection?
Wow.
And I opened it up to 1 Corinthians 15, which the way Eugene Peterson puts it is, it's resurrection. It's all resurrection. And because once again, in that moment, it was significant to know that resurrection is real and it's true. So getting back to your question, I like something that Tim Keller says about this in a sermon he gave. He says, what we have to do is rub resurrection hope into the pain and grief of death. So I think the word I used was marinate in it. And Tim's is a little bit different, right? It's this, okay, you've got this raw pain.
Yeah,
salve. That's
open wound. Yeah.
And you just have to keep rubbing this in until it begins to change your thoughts and your feelings. I mean, that's an amazing thing. Biblical truth, once truly taken hold of, changes our feelings. And that has certainly been my experience. And I think that is a reality.
You've also worked with grieving people. Like you've worked in this field. Mm-hmm. So what are some things to not say?
My most succinct advice in terms of what to say or not say is, does it esteem their loss or diminish it? So does it say, this hurts and I don't want to make light of it? That would be to esteem their loss, right? Or does it diminish it? Like, it's not really that bad. To say to someone, oh, this must hurt so much. Tell me about it. What's that like for you? That says that we're esteeming it.
Yeah.
That's big. And I want to hear about it. I'm not going to rush in and do all the talking about my experience or what somebody else's experience. You tell me.
Right.
But what I want you to know on the outset is I'm feeling this pain with you, right? This must hurt.
Right.
To diminish it is to say something like, well, at least you can have another child. Well, at least you can get married again. Well, at least he didn't suffer. All of these things. And why do we do that? We're wanting to cheer them up. We're wanting to help them, look on the bright side. But the effect for the grieving person when you do that is you're saying, this shouldn't hurt so much. You're kind of ridiculous. Is the way it is a grieving person. Right? You're kind of ridiculous to hurt this much. And if you would only see these good things, then maybe you wouldn't have to be so sad. But maybe sometimes what's really driving it is it's really inconvenient to me for you to be so sad. And I harshly judged people for what they did, what they said, and for what they didn't say. I feel like getting the chance to go through it again the second time with Gabe, that the Lord had worked in my heart, first of all, to help me forgive people who had genuinely hurt me with what they said or the fact that they said nothing at all.
Right.
Which to me was like, your daughter doesn't even really merit a mention, which was really hurtful. But that second time I went through it, I feel like I was able to make my posture more like this. Like, you've got the courage enough to approach us, and whatever you pitch our way, we're just going to take it. David and I were able to just say, no matter what they say, what we're going to hear is them saying, I care, and I'm not sure I can express it right, but I don't want to ignore this great pain and sorrow in your life and what you're experiencing.
Yeah, there's something so beautiful about the I'm sorry. Like, I'm so sorry this happened. Yeah. I'm so sorry for your loss.
My words are usually, I'm so sad with you.
Beautiful. Well, and I think it's such a model of Christ's behavior because Christ is so with, even down to his name. Yeah. And, the most beautiful sentence, Jesus wept. Yeah. Yes. And your journey, your story with Hope and Gabriel is so magnificent because God did work it for good. And you have told you have helped a lot of people.
Here's the good thing that he says, he's causing all things to work together for, that we would be conformed to the image of his son. There's the good thing. I don't have to try to find something in my circumstances that I think, okay, well, maybe that's good enough to justify that incredible loss. Right. Or to think, I think that verse isn't true because I can't see or I can't imagine anything good. Instead, I read that verse and I go, okay, here's the way you want to use this for good. Actually, in me. Mm-hmm. You want to use it to rub off all those rough edges of selfishness and worldliness and actually make me more like Jesus Christ. That's the good thing that you want to do. I think that prayer sounds like, Lord, don't let this be wasted pain in my life. And I so well remember praying that prayer, especially when I found out I was pregnant the second time. I was like, why are you asking me to do this again? Mm-hmm. And I can see right where I was in a hotel room in San Antonio and just saying, okay, Lord, if you are going to ask me to do this again, then do something significant with it. Mm-hmm. Even if the most significant thing you're going to do is inside me, to shape me and form me into who you want me to be. Help me to be content with that and to welcome that. Just don't let it be wasted pain. Don't let me be so hard or resistant or resentful that somehow I miss out on what you want to do in me and through me.
Can you see the pre Nancy before, Nancy after?
I feel embarrassed by how much I didn't see people's pain around me before then. I just, I didn't see it. I didn't see it. And I so remember walking into church, a short time after we had hope. And as I just looked around, it was just like, oh yeah, her mom died. And oh yeah, her husband left her. And I feel like one of the really good things it did in me was give me eyes to see other people's sorrow and suffering in a way that I just didn't before.
I wrote down a quote from one of your books. I'm just going to read you this quote. My friend, your healing begins when you become joined to Jesus by faith so that his resurrection life flows into your life. Mm-hmm. His resurrection life goes to work in the interior of your life, making you new so that you think new thoughts and feel new feelings so that you begin to desire the things that please him. Do you think achieving that, pursuing that really just is down to like being open, like saying that prayer, don't let this be wasted?
Certainly openness is a part of it.
Yeah.
When I came to understand union with Christ, that's what makes me a Christian. But you were dead, right? As it says in Ephesians. Now you've been made alive. How does that happen? It's not just something that Jesus stands back and, does to us, makes us dead to life. The reason that I've gone from spiritual death to being spiritually alive is because I have been joined to Christ. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the Spirit has bound me, sealed me to the resurrected, living Jesus Christ. And because of that, his life is flowing into me. And is it merely that I make a choice and I'm open to what he does? Certainly that's part of it, but he has prescribed what I'm going to call the ordinary means of grace. That's an official term for something that is actually so, as it says, ordinary. And it is the way God works in our lives. Here's how God works in our life. And man, does it sound boring. And man, does it sound like some kind of just, I've heard this before. But this is the way God has determined to work in our lives by his Spirit. Here's what he uses. His word. It's this organic thing that happens as we are joined to Christ and as we participate in, receive his means of grace. He's doing something in us that we can never do for ourselves.
So the quote I read, I think is from your book, Saved, which is on Acts, which is on the ministry of the apostles.
Yep.
I love that book. And I'd be curious to know how, when you started studying the book of Acts and the apostolic ministry, which was all about preaching Christ risen from the dead.
Christ, yes, crucified, risen.
So, what was the bridge between your very deep experience with death and then, looking at the apostolic? Did those connect for you in a unique way?
I think one of the most significant things that I learned as I wrote that book was to just come to a better understanding of why Jesus first and then the apostles had so much rejection and persecution for their ministry, because I don't think I had fully grasped what the issue was. And the truth is, the issue was all centered around resurrection.
Right.
And what's so fascinating about this is it's not that the Jews of their day don't believe in the resurrection of the dead. They actually do. I mean, back in the Old Testament, it's rather vague. We're not told as much as we want to, or given that promise too blatantly. I think the first place we get a taste of it is when Abraham, he's willing to sacrifice Isaac. But we actually need the New Testament to understand what was going through his mind, because the writer of Hebrews says that Abraham knew basically that God could raise him from the dead and believed that he would. He understood, okay, God made Adam out of dust, and so he can remake Isaac out of the ashes of his body. And so he believed in resurrection, or at least the possibility of it. But then a person who's probably a contemporary of Abraham would be Job. And what is it that gives him confidence as he faces what he faces? He says that he is confident that the day will come when then that after his flesh is destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. So he's got confidence of a life after his flesh is destroyed, after he's been dead in the ground, yet in my flesh. So he has some sense of resurrection.
I've never read that verse before being like a resurrection verse.
Doesn't it have to be?
Oh, it makes way more sense.
If we look at Jesus's ministry, it's very concentrated, especially in John 5. Jesus mentions 4 times that there's going to be a resurrection of the dead in the last day. There's going to come a day that the Messiah is going to come. And when he comes, he's going to come in all of this glory, and he's going to bring in all of these new creation realities that have been promised by the prophets throughout the whole Old Testament. Both in the Old Testament, like in the prophet Isaiah, those in their graves, they will rise from their sleep. Right? Yeah. And Jesus says, about Lazarus, he's just gone to sleep. Right. And the same thing about Talitha, who he rises from her bed. To be absent from the body is to be at home with the Lord. And so it's like our bodies rest in the ground, awaiting that resurrection day call of Jesus Christ. Where meanwhile, our souls rest in the presence of Christ. But I think the main reason Jesus in particular uses that term, that he's just asleep, that he does want to give us the sense that death is not the end. Now, for those of us who have lost someone to death, it can feel like the end. Or for those of us who are maybe facing death, because the only experience we've ever had is living in these bodies in this world with what we can see and touch and feel. And this is why we need faith, right? Faith is believing in what we can't see. And so we cannot imagine this. But the reality is that it's called sleep because, in a sense, in the perspective of eternity, let's look at it that way. What we might spend many, many years in the ground, but in perspective of eternity, we will have just taken a brief nap, awakening to this new eternal day for which we were made.
Nancy.
Yes.
Tell people where they can find you.
You can find more than you want to know about Nancy Guthrie at nancyguthrie.com, right? So you can read there about a lot of my books, and I do travel and do a lot of speaking and teaching, so you can find it all there.
I would also love if you'd close us with a passage from Thessalonians that you had in your book about, I have it for you.
Oh, okay.
About holding on to hope. Would you just read this for us and then close us out?
Paul's speaking to this church in Thessalonica that he's just been with briefly, and maybe they're thinking they've missed this resurrection promise, and he wants to assure them they haven't. So he says, I can tell you this directly from the Lord. We who are still living when the Lord returns will not rise to meet him ahead of those who are in their graves, for the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a commanding shout, with the call of the archangel, and with the trumpet call of God. And first, all the Christians who have died, they're going to rise from their graves. And then together with them, we who are still alive and remain on the earth, then we're going to be caught up in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air and remain with him forever. As he comes down in the clouds, we're going to come back with him to this earth. And then he says, so comfort and encourage each other with these words.
Nancy, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Mel. Loved it.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Rising podcast as we look further into the resurrection of Jesus. Did you know The Rising is also an album? The Rising is an album that I wrote that tells the story of Christ's resurrection. Each song on the album is written from a different perspective of someone who was actually there at the resurrection. each guest on The Rising also has a perspective. And you know what? So do you. I would venture to say that your perspective is the one that I'm most interested in. Would so love it if you'd subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, and you can find new episodes on any of those platforms as well. If you want to get to know me better, you can find me on Instagram or go to melaniepenn.com and you can send me a message there. I make things for you, and I'm so glad that you are here for The Rising.